OSHA is already so small and ineffective that any kind of cuts are going to be catastrophic for the agency and unfortunately for the health and safety of American workers as well.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Jordan Barab is the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Labor for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. He is now the proprietor of Confined Space, a newsletter on labor and workplace safety. Jordan Barab, welcome to the Valley Labor Report. Thank you for taking the time.
Sure, happy to be here.
Really do appreciate it, and appreciate you having taken some time with me off the air a while back to talk to me about some of this stuff. And I want to start off with a pretty basic sort of level-setting question, which is, what is OSHA, MSHA, and NIOSH? What do they do? Why are they important? Why should people care about it?
Okay, so OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, MSHA is the Mine Safety and Health Administration, and NIOSH is the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. MSHA was created in the late 1960s to protect miners on the job, mostly coal miners, obviously, who are vulnerable to explosions and cave-ins and black lung disease. OSHA was created in 1970, passed by Congress in 1970, with the mission to assure the health and safety of all American workers, aside, obviously, from the mine workers who were covered by MSHA. Now, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health was created as part of the Occupational Safety and Health Act to do research into health and safety conditions, both in mines as well as in general industry. They do an enormous amount of research. They do a lot of educational materials. They propose models for OSHA standards, and they also provide a lot of money around the country to educate health and safety professionals, from industrial hygienists all the way up to occupational safety and health physicians. So it's an extremely important, very small agency, only about $300 million budget, very small agency, but very important in terms of the overall health and safety of American workers in this country.
Yes, $300 million budget is like $1 per worker, right? So that's that's not very much. And
no, it's not very much at all. No.
Many folks think that, or actually, it's not $1 per worker; it's $1 per citizen, something like $2 per worker, because there are less workers than residents. Anyway, many people think that workplace safety regulations are too stringent, and that's kind of the theory of DOGE. That's the theory of the few remaining supporters of this DOGE project, and it's that it's so hard to be an employer in America with respect to all the rules they have to follow. And so, people that kind of subscribe to that idea, and there are workers that subscribe to that idea that it's too hard to be an employer, they may not be too worried about OSHA getting slashed. And so before we talk into specifically what's happening at OSHA and MSHA and NIOSH, I want to ask you why they're wrong. And one example that I have is there's some local business owners that did a podcast here for a short amount of time, and they talked to us about how they presented this argument basically that, it's so hard being a business owner. If somebody got hurt on my job, I might go to jail. And I had the displeasure of telling them that they almost certainly would not only would they not go to jail, almost certainly they would probably not have to pay any fines either if somebody got hurt on their job, with the lax labor relations that we have, or labor regulations that we have. And so, why are folks like that wrong that we don't have too many regulations with respect to workplace safety and health and things like that?
Yeah, well, we actually have far too few regulations that oversee worker safety and health. I mean, every time OSHA or MSHA proposes a new health and safety standard, the affected industry, cries out that it's going to cause, mass unemployment, mass bankruptcy. The sky's falling, but that never happens. And that's partly because they exaggerate the costs of it, but also because they don't look at the benefits. So, maybe a company has to invest in some ways, training and other equipment to make their workplace safer. But the fact is, you're saving lives and you're preventing injuries. And if you look at the cost of a lost time injury or the cost of a worker's death, that always far exceeds the amount of money that the employers have to invest in making their workplace safe. So if you want to look at the costs and benefits, I mean, there are enormous benefits to health and safety regulation in terms of preventing costly, obviously painful and tragic worker injuries, illnesses, and death. So again, it's all a myth, and there've been study after study, showing that workplace safety and health regulation pays off, and that employers who actually are serious about having a safe workplace are actually much more profitable than employers who cut corners on safety and health.
Right. And just as another Alabama example, the Washington Post had a recent profile of a lumber mill that was deemed the deadliest workplace in America, and it didn't get shut down because OSHA doesn't have that authority, right? I mean, are you familiar with this case?
Yeah, Phoenix Lumber, yes, in Phoenix, Alabama. Yeah, this was a good case. I mean, this was a relatively small employment, I think 50 people, and yet, every year there are dozens of employees that got seriously injured, and they over the 10 years, also 4 horrible fatalities, including one person that fell into a running auger. And basically only small pieces of him came out. OSHA cited this company millions of dollars. I mean, normally OSHA's fines are very low, but because of the egregious behavior of this company over the years, OSHA managed to assemble penalties that reached into the millions of dollars, but it didn't really change the behavior of the employer. The employer continued on without paying. And OSHA, as you mentioned, OSHA has no authority to shut down a company. They can't tell a company, sorry, you're too unsafe, you've killed too many people, we're shutting you down. I mean, OSHA does have a very narrow authority to shut down certain operations if they present an imminent danger. If somebody's in a trench, that's 10 feet deep, OSHA can, get them out and shut down the operation there. But normally OSHA can't shut down operations. They can't shut down businesses. All they can do is issue normally very low penalties. And OSHA is so small that it can't even get to most workplaces. I mean, it can get only to a very small number of workplaces every year, which means, unfortunately, a lot of OSHA citations are reactive. In other words, they only come after a worker is hurt or killed rather than before.
Right. I mean, we've seen some OSHA citations for deaths where the employer was, like if the employer had behaved and had done the training and done the things that they ought to do, somebody would still be here, right? That is what happens when employers don't follow safety regulations, and the fines for that can be like as low as $16,000. I mean, the idea that OSHA's power is so great over employers is just so absurd, because exactly like you said, so much of what OSHA does is reactive, and the AFL-CIO, which is the labor federation in the United States, they put out a death on the job report every year around Workers' Memorial Day. So we should be getting a new one here pretty soon. But they point out every year, and it's always basically the same, that it would take nearly 200 years for OSHA inspectors to visit each workplace in America once. Just one time, just to visit them, not to do a big whole huge investigation, just to be there in person and observe. Almost 200 years, and who knows how long it would be now that the DOGE cuts have happened. But what does that do for their ability, or why should we have an OSHA that is proactive? Like, why would it be a good thing if we had an OSHA that was well funded and well staffed enough that they could not only react to things, but they could do like proactive sorts of things?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as you say, it takes almost 200 years if OSHA wanted to visit every workplace once. And what that means is that any given employer is very unlikely to ever see an OSHA inspector unless somebody in their workplace is killed or seriously injured, or the rare conditions where a worker actually files a complaint without fearing retaliation. So again, most employers aren't going to ever see an OSHA inspector. So if you're not going to see one, why should? And you're inclined to cut corners on safety. Why should you care? I mean, it would be like, you've got traffic, speed limits on the street, 55 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour. But if you will almost never have a chance of getting a ticket, what's to keep you from actually speeding or breaking other traffic laws? The threat of enforcement that is a deterrent. Unfortunately, for many employers who would want to cut corners on safety and health. I mean, there are a lot of employers out there who want to do the right thing, but unfortunately, there are a lot that don't and would rather save money by trying to shortcut basic health and safety standards. And that's what we saw at the Phoenix lumber mill that you mentioned. It cost them too much. When something broke, it cost them too much to shut down the whole line. They didn't want to do preventive maintenance, so they had people actually trying to fix the machines while they were running, and consequently, people, were killed, lost limbs, and were ground up in these machinery because the employer was not complying with basic health and safety standards.
And just to go back to that for one more moment, I mean, multiple people died, multiple limbs lost, fingers lost, things like that. But the thing that actually finally ended up shutting it down was that they were stealing a little bit of water from the city, or it was either water or electricity. They had somehow bypassed the normal thing, and they were taking water from the city or electricity, and so the city shut it down over the safety stuff, but they had the authority to do that because of the theft that was going on. And so it's easier for a city to shut down an employer over water violations than it is for OSHA to stop companies from killing people. I mean, that's how weak OSHA is. And so, when you were at OSHA, I'm curious what the, what was the most frustrating kind of limitation for you and also for, the rank and file in OSHA inspectors? What was some of the most frustrating kind of limitations on your authority at OSHA?
Well, there were a lot of frustrations when I was at OSHA, but you're right. I mean, in terms of enforcement, it is the low penalties. The fact that there are certain conditions, the maximum penalties are low, and then there are a lot of reasons that they end up the penalties end up being much lower even than the maximums. The fact that we didn't have standards that covered a lot of basic issues. I mean, heat, workplace violence, ergonomics, and it takes OSHA, 10 to 20 years to issue standards. That was extremely frustrating. But also, just looking at the political situation, I mean, the attacks from the business community and Republicans in Congress, were extremely frustrating as well, because, I mean, they know perfectly well that workers are getting killed for preventable causes, but, they're just doing the bidding of business, again, who are crying, that the sky is falling because OSHA is issuing either too many standards or, if God forbid OSHA is enforcing the law, then they're being confrontational, right, instead of cooperative. Unfortunately, we'd all like to be cooperative and, we'd all like to have voluntary safety and health, but, not everyone volunteers to have a safe workplace. So, unfortunately, like every part of life, you need laws, you need enforcement, you need standards to ensure that workers are safe in the workplace.
Right. And so, moving up to today, what has Trump done so far in terms of cuts to OSHA, MSHA, and NIOSH?
Okay, well, that's a good question, and we're unfortunately there's still a lot to be seen. Probably the most serious thing he did was pretty much eliminate NIOSH, and this again, NIOSH, National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, is the agency that does the research, education, and provides basically the pipeline for future OSHA professionals. They pretty much eliminated it, except for a few parts that deal with veterans of nuclear war, or the nuclear industry that were exposed, and World Trade Center workers who are inhaled the toxic dust. Pretty much everything else in NIOSH is gone, which means there's an enormous amount of expertise and work on mine safety. A lot of issues that NIOSH handles are areas where OSHA doesn't have standards. Again, like heat. NIOSH was the first agency to really develop heat standards that protected workers, although they were voluntary and they were guidelines. It's not mandatory until OSHA actually issues a standard. So anyway, that's NIOSH, pretty much gone at this point, among all the other cuts that were done at the Department of Health and Human Services. In terms of MSHA and OSHA, we haven't seen a whole lot yet. The administration is threatening to close down some offices, which will make enforcement much harder. Inspectors will have to travel a lot further in order to get to workplaces. We've seen they just suspended the temporarily, they say, but they suspended the enforcement of MSHA's new silica standard, and this is something that prevented, after a long time, and this was just issued recently during the Biden administration, but that prevented a particularly severe form of black lung that this is not just caused by coal dust, but also by silica in the mines, and has caused enormous rise in the incidence of black lung disease, and a particularly severe form of black lung disease because of the silica, and a form of black lung disease that is also hitting young miners. So miners that may have started in their 20s. By the time they're in their 30s or 40s, they can't breathe. They need lung transplants. And he just suspended the enforcement of that. Ironically, because they weren't sure of the kind of respirators that would be available, because another thing that NIOSH did, which is now being eliminated, is to certify respirators. So basically, the Trump administration, gets rid of the respirator certification program and then uses as an excuse to stop enforcing the silica standard.
Right.
And
OSHA, just to underscore really quick the silica rule, about 15 years ago, 1 in 30 coal miners who had been mining for 20 years had gotten black lung. And black lung is basically a death sentence. There's not a cure. It's just a matter of postponing your death, which is going to come by, basically strangulation. I mean, it's a very, very scary disease. And now that number is 1 in 5. 1 in 5 coal miners who have been mining for 20 years now are getting black lung. I mean, that is a huge increase in the incidence rate of this disease. And we know what's causing it because of NIOSH, and we know how to stop it. And the Trump administration is standing in the way.
Yeah, and the other thing NIOSH did was pretty much provide free health care to workers suffering from black lung in terms of health examinations, in terms of monitoring their health, figuring out ways to ease their suffering. This was all done by NIOSH, and all of that is now gone. Not only the treatment of workers, but any kind of the records. I mean, the statistics you're talking about were all kept by NIOSH. All of that is now gone. So anyway, OSHA, back to OSHA. OSHA, we haven't seen too much yet. They have been threatening to shut down some offices, as I said, but we haven't really seen too much coming out of the Department of Labor that will impact OSHA yet. But they just offered more early retirement with a deadline in a couple of weeks, and we're expecting some pretty drastic downsizing, reorganization, layoffs after that. But again, OSHA is already so small. As you said, they can only reach a few workplaces every year anyway. It takes them decades sometimes to issue standards. OSHA is already so small and ineffective that any kind of cuts are going to be catastrophic for the agency, and unfortunately for the health and safety of American workers as well.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Can you talk some more about what effect this is going to have on their ability to execute the mission? I don't know if you saw this, but last week OSHA, I think for the first time since the Trump administration came in, they issued a couple of press releases about enforcement actions that they were doing, and so that's about the same timeline as the first administration. It took several weeks before the Trump administration started enforcing workplace safety law again. And so for OSHA, do you think that we're gonna see something like maybe a return to a mean here, or are you anticipating more cuts? And then for NIOSH and MSHA, these office closures and basically the decimation of NIOSH, 2/3 of their staff, what effect is that going to have on their ability to execute the mission?
Well, yeah, I mean, OSHA already has a hard time executing its mission. At least MSHA is required to inspect every coal mine 4 times a year. There's no such requirement for OSHA to get to any workplaces at any schedule. So, I mean, the fact that, right now they can only reach every workplace about once every 200 years, any cuts will make that much, much worse. OSHA will, Republicans traditionally, and I'm sure this administration as well, don't issue any new standards. So right now, OSHA was working on a heat standard to protect workers against high heat. That's killing more and more workers every year. Workplace violence standard and infectious disease standards, all of these things are going to grind to a halt. But if they start laying people off, or if Congress in the next budget negotiations start cutting OSHA's budget, we're going to see an agency that already struggles becoming, almost totally ineffective in terms of protecting workers. And, employers know that. So they know that there would be even a less chance of an OSHA inspector ever showing up in their workplace, even if somebody gets hurt or killed. So, without OSHA, all the guardrails will be gone. Except, there are one exceptions. There are 21 states, that run their own OSHA programs. They have to be at least as effective as federal OSHA. About half of those states are, have Democratic governors or legislators, and they can actually, go above and beyond what OSHA is doing. But they get 50% of their funding from federal OSHA. And again, if they cut OSHA's budget, then even the state plan states are going to start suffering in terms of their ability to protect workers in their states.
So why couldn't OSHA just be more efficient? I mean, we hear every year that the AFL puts out their report that it'd take nearly 200 years to visit each workplace once. Well, why don't they just do it faster? Why can't they do that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard to be more efficient when you have, I mean, the line is always, we're going to do more with less. But anybody that knows organizations, especially federal government organizations, knows that you do less with less. I mean, these agencies like OSHA are already strained to the bone. I mean, there is no extra, staff power there. There are no extra employees just wandering around, waiting for things to do. Again, they've already been cut to the bone. Same with NIOSH. I mean, if you look at the things that NIOSH did on that tiny, tiny budget, I mean, you'd be amazed at how actually efficient and effective these agencies are, considering their low staffing levels and low budgets. So you have agencies here that have basically been, OSHA hasn't had a decent, budget increase since 2010. They pretty much had a flat budget, and combined with inflation, that essentially means they've already been getting cut every year. The standards budget, the enforcement budget, in real dollars, they're all significantly lower than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even during the Reagan administration. They're much lower than during the Reagan administration, believe it or not. So any further cuts in that, again, will totally decimate any ability in this country to enforce safe and healthy working conditions.
Yeah, I mean, when you say much lower, I mean, you're not kidding. I think that I saw that it's literally like half of the staff of OSHA under Reagan is what we have right now. Something like that.
Yeah,
I mean,
and we have obviously...
No, go ahead.
And with a much, much larger economy, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah. There are much more people working than there were under Reagan, and we have half of the workplace safety inspectors. And I said that to somebody with reference to another organization within the government, and he was like, "Yeah, well, they didn't have computers back then, so you can so why can't why can't you just do all of this with computers?"
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess you could put a computer in one of Elon Musk's self-driving cars and drive it out to a workplace, run around and eject a robot to go inspect the workplace. But I don't think that's going to be happening anytime soon. You actually need real inspectors who hopefully are paid a decent amount of money, because they're highly trained and highly skilled, to walk around these workplaces and identify hazards and talk to workers and talk to the employers and determine what needs to be done to make these workplaces safe. Unfortunately, I mean, you can do targeting with computers. You can do a lot of stuff with computers, but you can't inspect a workplace with a computer.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you said, you mentioned hopefully they would be paid well. And unfortunately, the reality is that by and large, they're not paid as well as they should be, certainly. And they're not paid, comparable to as much as you would for like comparable experience and education in the private sector. We actually had some NIOSH employees on last week, and during our interview, they got a text from a NIOSH engineer who had been laid off, who already has an offer from the private sector to work for double. I mean, literally
Yeah.
a 100% raise has come in within 48 hours of him being fired, but he doesn't want to take it because he wants to work for the American people and he wants to keep American workers safe instead of taking this big, fat, juicy paycheck from the private sector. And so, that's the kind of thing that we're talking about when we're talking about these federal bureaucrats. They're like people who are giving up significantly more money in the private sector to serve you.
Yeah. And quite frankly, I spent a fair amount of time now in the federal government, and I've never seen, more dedicated workers than I have there. These are, as you say, these are people that aren't working for the money. They're working because they have a mission in life, and that mission in life is to help workers. But that was a problem we always had at OSHA. We had a high level of turnover, especially for the highly specialized jobs. Those inspectors that, inspect, oil refineries and chemical plants have a very high skill level. And it was hard holding on to those people because the industry would come in and, not offer them double. They'd offer them 3, 4, 5 times what they were making at OSHA.
Wow.
Which is hard. You got a family. It's hard to turn that type of thing down. And of course, now they're being, now they're just being laid off. And, so yeah, some of them won't have a problem finding a much higher paid job, but that's not why they're doing this job. They're not doing it for the money. They're doing it because it's the right thing to do for this country.
Right. And so what are some of the things that you're hearing from inside these agencies and from outside? As in, are there folks that are reaching out to you that have been saying, we've been trying to, I'm a worker and I've tried to report my employer and I'm not hearing anything back from OSHA. What are you hearing inside and outside?
Yeah, well, all right. So inside OSHA, inside these agencies, obviously the workers, the ones who haven't been laid off yet, are terrified about what's coming down the line and very intimidated, very, very reluctant to stick their necks out on anything. When you're running an agency, you've got all this career staff there who have been there for years, and they don't always, we came in and we got a lot of changes we wanted to make. They aren't always in favor of those changes, but they, they'll go along with it. But they're particularly valuable in telling you things like, okay, you want to get from here to there. Well, the way you want to do it isn't going to work. I'll tell you a better way, more effective way to do it without the unintended consequences. But if you're afraid to speak up because you're going to be fired, those agencies just aren't going to run as well. In terms of outside the agencies, in terms of workers, complaining, I haven't heard much yet. I haven't really been able to hear much yet about what's going on in the field in terms of inspections. It's very hard, again, even for me, I still have friends in the agency, to get people to talk because, again, they are so terrified. A lot of the citations that, like you mentioned, that are still, well, the ones that we know about that are still being issued, these are all from inspections, that happened during the Biden administration. So we haven't really seen the data yet on what is happening in terms of enforcement during the Trump administration. But obviously, most Republican administrations, they keep doing enforcement more or less. The penalties are lower. If they cut staff, obviously the number of inspections are lower. The severity of penalties are less. They don't do as many what they call general duty clause citations, which are citations for hazards for which there are no OSHA standards. So that's a normal thing you see under Republican administrations. And it's still a bit too early to see how this Trump administration is impacting actual enforcement in the field.
Right. Well, we'll definitely keep an eye on it, and I know that you will too. As we're wrapping up, I want to talk about your newsletter a little bit. It's called Confined Space. You can find it at it's jordanbarab.com/confined space, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I've been doing it off and on for about 20 years now. So.
Well, it is a great resource. I think I found it like a couple of years ago, but I never really dug into it, and I started digging into it a couple of weeks ago or a month ago or so. Whenever we talked, and it is a great resource. Lots of news and articles about workplace safety and things that are coming out from the Trump administration, and you also have a regular newsletter kind of in the vein of what we've been doing with Boss Watch, but Boss Watch, we've been primarily relying on press releases from OSHA and the Wage and Hour Division and MSHA and things like that. And what you've been doing is you've just been finding it's called the weekly toll, and you just try to find every workplace death in the last week that you can, and you put it all in one newsletter. How do you go about doing that, and what made you want to do a newsletter like that?
Well, the reason I wanted to do it is because, workers these days, generally workers aren't killed. Well, let me put it this way. Workplace death doesn't usually appear in the media unless there are 5 or 10 workers that are killed at one time and then through an explosion, and then you might have a few days of articles. Most workers are just killed one at a time. Nobody notices, nobody hears about it. Nobody really cares except for their friends and family and coworkers. And yet, more than 5,000 workers are killed on the job every year. About 20 times that many are killed from occupational disease, and nobody knows this. So this is a way not only to make sure people know about workers who are getting killed in the workplace, how they're getting killed in the workplace, but I also try to put their names in because people should know, who these people are, who their families are, and also that a lot of, most of these could have been prevented. Now, I depend basically on just doing Google searches. I've got 100 and something Google searches out there. Yet I only actually collect something like 25 incidents a week. And yet somewhere around 100 workers are killed every week on the job. Believe it or not, 100 workers are killed. Imagine if an airliner with 100 people crashed every single week in the country, what the response would be. But anyway, about 100 workers are killed every week on the job. I get about 20 of those. I think I do a pretty good job of media searches. So what that means is that, probably over half of the workers killed on the job in this country, never even show up in the media, never show up in the paper. Nobody even knows about it. Which is also kind of a tragedy in and of itself. But I do try to, I think it's important for Americans to know what's happening to workers in this country. I think it's, important for them to know their sacrifice, and I think it's important for people to know their names.
Right. Right. And over the years of doing this specific newsletter, the Weekly Toll, as part of your broader Confined Space project, are there any kind of like patterns or like things that you have noticed from like similarities or differences or just revelations that you've had from compiling this for so long?
Well, there are a lot of deaths that OSHA doesn't really cover. There's a lot of deaths that occur on the highways, truck drivers, people like that, which aren't really covered by anybody. Nobody, they're kind of exempted from OSHA because they're covered by DOT, but DOT, the Department of Transportation, doesn't do a whole lot. There are a lot of workers who are killed, shot to death basically in retail stores, especially those that are open all night. And again, nobody, the cops do investigate that. Obviously, OSHA doesn't really. So there's a lot of stuff in there that isn't investigated. And then you have the things that just make my blood boil. One of the things that makes my blood boil are trench collapses because they're very strict OSHA regulations that no worker can go down into a trench more than 5 feet deep without shoring up that trench or using a trench box. And yet, every couple of weeks we see another worker, sometimes more. We just had 2 in Baltimore that are killed in trench collapse, perfectly preventable, and there's really no construction employer in this country that doesn't know about the hazards of trenches. People falling off of buildings. I take my dogs for a walk all the time, and there are always workers on top of buildings without wearing fall protection. And every week, there's at least one and usually more workers who are killed by falling off of buildings because they aren't wearing fall protection. The employers just aren't supplying it or training workers on how to use it. All of these things, especially the perfectly preventable ones, again, just infuriate me every week. OSHA just isn't big enough, to get to every little neighborhood, to find, to locate workers who are on top of roofs or down in trenches. I've done a lot of calls to OSHA just walking the dogs when I see things, and they'll usually come out. But, how many people know enough to do that or are going to do that? Right. And, OSHA just isn't really, if everybody called in every worker they saw on top of a roof without fall protection, OSHA wouldn't even be able to handle that.
Right. Well, Jordan Barab, I've really appreciated the time. You're a great resource. Really recommend folks checking out your newsletter, jordanbarab.com/confined space. Is there anything else that you would want to leave our audience with before we let you go?
Well, yeah, we're unfortunately we're still at the beginning of the Trump administration. We've already seen some devastating impact on, just labor in general, and specifically workplace safety and health. Unfortunately, there's a lot more to come. It's imperative that people, talk to their legislators, Republicans and Democrats. Even Republicans need to know that there are workers, their constituents, in their districts that are dying, and that dying from preventable causes. We need to educate them. We need to educate our local politicians. We need to obviously organize more unions because ultimately, having a union is your best protection against being exploited or being killed in the workplace. We will have elections coming up at some point. Hopefully the damage won't be too bad there, but it's important, again, to support people who support workers and particularly who support workplace safety.
All right. Jordan Barab, author, proprietor of the Confined Space newsletter, jordanbarab.com/confined space, former OSHA official. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
All right. Happy to be here and happy to do it again.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.
Which side are you on?